Hello and welcome back to English 103, and this week we're talking about the massage therapy article. I've just been reading your comments online and I can't help but smile. I love the vigor with which people are questioning, what about this, what about that, why not this other thing? And it also is a little bit amusing to me because when we read the first article, Peeling Back the Natural Food Label, I got a lot of people really upset about the article veracity, not in terms of questioning its veracity, its truthfulness, but thinking, oh my gosh, if this is true, how can it be true that the government can get away with this? So it's interesting to see a turn now, and in discussing this article, to see folks focused on the fact that BioFreeze is the analgesic that they were working with, and Johnson & Johnson, which makes BioFreeze, funded the study. A lot of people concerned about whether or not that means the study is therefore illegitimate. So hopefully you've already done a bunch of the work that I asked you to do in terms of kind of getting familiar with the library, in terms of reading what this author has to say about primary and secondary sources and what scholarly sources are like, what they function like, how they might be different from more popular sources. And hopefully that means that the very first thing you did when you picked up this article, I'm going to keep referring over here because my article's in front of me. The first thing you did was look up who these authors are. If you didn't, you might want to make a note for yourself. The first thing you should do when you grab any academic article, really I would argue anything, but we're going to just talk about academics today, that'll be my default, is to look up who the authors are. The second thing to look up, and hopefully you did, is where was this published? So this was published in a peer-reviewed journal. At the top of the article, in very tiny print, you can see that it says Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies. It was published in 2014. The volume number is 18, and its page range is 322 to 325. All of that information is absolutely crucial for writing a citation, but it also helps you understand what you're looking at. My very first move is always, who is Tiffany Fields? And then I look up who those other people are as well. Tiffany Fields, by the way, one of the most published writers in terms of massage therapy research. She has tons and tons of published work. Second thing I do is Google, is Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies peer-reviewed? If it is, then automatically any question of, is this garbage, is this biased in a way that it can't be trusted, kind of goes out the window. It's very rare that it does happen that peer-reviewed work ends up being based on poop, but it's so rare because peer review is a very rigorous and very rigid process. So peer review means that I have to be, first of all, an expert in my field. I have to have an education in my field. And when I present a study or any of my writing for publication to a peer-reviewed journal, have to submit that in time before publication for it to be sent out to anonymous reviewers who are also experts in their field. Those anonymous reviewers look at that work and determine not is it true or not. It's a little too simplistic. They determine, is this generally in keeping with the standards of our field, with what's been found before? Do we see any anomalies in the way the study was put together, in the way the data was collected, in the way the data was analyzed? And then if they have any concerns, they can either deny the publication of the article or they can call for the author to make substantial changes and substantiations, and then it goes through the review process again. So the first thing you should come up with when you do those very two simple things is that while it is true that Johnson & Johnson funded this study, it is highly unlikely that that had anything to do with the results that the researchers found. We'll get to their results in a few minutes because that's another hint that there was no bias taking place. I'm just going to kind of go through the article and mention to you things that if we were in a class together, I would expect you to mention to me. It's unfortunate that we're doing it this way because it's a lot more fun to tease out from you what you got in a big group than it is to like almost give away the spoilers of what you should have mentioned, should have noticed, should have seen going on and investigated. But this is what we're left with because we're in an online environment. And so I'm going to try to go slowly. Please pause this as you need to take good notes for yourself when you're like, holy crap, how did I never think of that? I don't understand why I didn't think of that. That's a good time to hit the spacebar button, which it turns out pauses the video in YouTube. I didn't know that till recently. And then take some notes for yourself, because this is the first in a series of academic articles that I'm going to expect you to read, understand. You've got an exam on one coming up this weekend. And so all these little tips that I'm going to show you are things that are helpful to you in putting together a toolbox for how to read these academic articles. So the first thing that you want to notice on the page 322 is that in addition to telling you who the author is, it also tells you the affiliations of the authors. That means it tells you where they work and where they are doing their research. So Tiffany Field works for the Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami Medical School. That's going to be important in a minute. You'll also notice that there's a summary. We also call that an abstract. All academic work has a summary or abstract that gives you like the down and dirty overview of what it is they investigated and what they feel like they found. In my on-ground classes, the first question I always get is, why were there only 22 people? And usually I get it in a kind of accusatory way. How dare they only do this on 22 people? But it turns out that research doesn't have to be done on a lot of people to figure out whether or not something warrants further research. And that's kind of what this study is doing. Did they see enough of a change in using the topical analgesic that they would want to do a more full-blown research study? You could see where you don't want to spend a ton of money the first time out. If you can spend a little bit of money and find out, is there validity to this concept? And is it worth funding a larger study? So that's kind of what we're looking at here. The second question that I usually get is, what accounts for the crazy demographics involved? Under participants and methods, you see them delineate who the people they spoke to were. This part of the class usually takes about 10 minutes while we try to figure out why were so many women involved and so few men, meaning none. And then invariably I get a student who says, good God, why are there so many Hispanic people? Someone in the class giggles at that point and says, they're in Miami. And so that's a good first clue that you need to be paying attention to context. When you're reading the methodology section of these studies, it's not just a bunch of blah blah. It is true that they have to put that stuff in to be legit, but it's also true that there's a ton you can glean from just looking at who were the people who were involved. Why were they involved? And that's something you got to ask yourself and think through. We'll do that in a second. Where are they? Physically, where in the world are they? So then if you have a setup like this study where the people self-select in, they chose to take part. They got an email that was sent to all faculty and staff at the medical school, and they self-selected in. If you're in Miami, you're going to have a larger population in general that's Latino than you would in other parts of the United States necessarily. And so these numbers are not skewed. These numbers are reflective. They're reflective of the place and time in which this research was done. It always trips up my students that the bulk of the participants, meaning all of them, I keep saying bulk, but it's really all of them. This is me trying to be careful with my language and not being accurate as a result, are women. And invariably we spend a good deal of time talking about why do you think it is that women would self-select into the study and men would not. They didn't glean from the email exchange. They took everyone who responded, and none of the respondents were male. You know, there's no way to answer that says this is the truth of why it happened. But there are some perspectives you can take that can help with maybe comprehending what might be going on. The first of which is, how often have we noticed that men are socialized less frequently than women to feel like if somebody asks for help, it's their job to go and help? Because remember, this email came as a blanket email to tons of people. And so who's more likely to say, oh, I should go help with that? Doesn't mean men aren't helpful. What we're talking about is the ways that social behavior and social expectations can play a role in what people feel like they will or should do. Another thing students often mention as we kind of deconstruct and unpack that demographic is that men very frequently are socialized to not talk about their pain, with the great ease that women are socialized to talk about their pain. Not that women complain and men don't complain. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about the ways that there's a greater social stigma for men to talk about body pain than there is for women to talk about body pain in our culture. And you would inherently have to not only be willing to say, I am in pain, but also to talk about it in some great depth if you're taking part in a survey that's looking qualitatively at how you feel. So we could maybe make some other assumptions there about how socialization plays a role in who responded and who didn't. Many times, my students get to numbers and they kind of gloss. They just keep on rolling. They don't really take a good look at the numbers. But if you look at Table 2, you'll notice some really interesting things going on. Mostly, there's not a lot of difference. And so when we get to the discussion where the authors are talking about their novel findings, here's where Richard did a really beautiful job of parsing this language. So novel can mean new and different, but it also means not really in keeping with what we've found previously. So they talk about there being a change, but they also talk about it in terms of this isn't actually such a significant deal. This maybe warrants further study, but didn't blow us away. They don't say that colloquially. They say it in academic speak, which is to give you the numbers, let you see their results, and if you don't analyze their results and just read the discussion, you could easily walk away with the idea that it was more profound than they actually tell you it is. But if you read their discussion after you've analyzed the numbers, the very minute shift in things that were positive, and in some instances, the not shift, the actual detriment that is recorded, it makes the discussion richer. It helps you understand what it is they're saying in the discussion with greater depth. The last thing that we talk about usually in my classes is the ways that we might put ourselves in the bodies of people who are having this work done. Now, some of you did a beautiful job on the questions. You wanted to know things like what time of day were we talking about? What other kinds of modalities were they enjoying? Was anybody getting acupuncture? Why don't we ask these things? And all of those are legitimate questions to ask about the study. Now, notice I said they're legitimate questions to ask about the study, but they don't delegitimize the study. The fact that they didn't do everything doesn't mean that this study is illegitimate. They can't do everything. What they can do is take a size and shape of study that's doable for them with the funding they have and start that process. So your questions are really instructive and helpful as a what could be next instead of a what's wrong with these people. And it's an interesting twist because you're doing the exact same thing. But instead of saying, what's wrong with these people? Why didn't they do it right? You're saying, here's some ways that researchers might look at it more effectively in future studies. Really profoundly positive thing to be doing. So one of the things you can do, as strange as it seems, is to put yourself in the chair in this massage therapy room at the University of Miami. And the positive associations. Now notice I did not say the healing power of BioFreeze, but the positive sensation of BioFreeze might need you, for full understanding, to think about it in terms of what it would be like to be in Miami, to have hand arthritis, to be in a hot, humid location with hand pain. Hand pain, inflammation, is actually exacerbated by heat and humidity. So you've got that going as well. And then think about, what does BioFreeze feel like? These numbers in Table 2 are even less significant if we include what we know just from thinking about how would my body feel in that situation. That anything cooling in Miami is probably experienced as positive. And yet, It's also true that in upstate New York in January, if you have hand arthritis and you just came in from the cold, the last thing you want someone putting on your hand is BioFreeze because it feels cold at first. So it also can be as simple, in addition to like investigating on the internet, which you should do, and looking up words, thank you, Richard, which you should do, and doing the hard work of reading the data as thoroughly as you possibly can. That won't always be possible because some of this stuff is written in jargon that we don't have any training in, but you can at least attempt understanding at like the number was 6 and then the number was 5. We also can do something as simple as, what would that look like if it were me? So I hope that this discussion will help moving us into Harry Potter. The article is not actually about Harry Potter, so if you're nervous that you haven't read Harry Potter and that might put you at some disadvantage, it won't. But these are the tricks and tools that I want you to take and use to start reading Harry Potter and figuring out what you can know from it. The first article we read was in the social sciences. It was in psychology. This article we would call more in the hard sciences, where we're looking at more data and more less discussion of people's desires and more a quantifying of people's qualitative feelings. So it's still not like biology, but it's a harder approach to science than social science typically is. The next one we're reading is squarely in the humanities. And the reason we're reading these different kinds of articles is because you in academics will be required to read across all these different genres. So head into Harry Potter, take your bag of tools with you. Let me know what you think of Harry Potter in the discussion board that I'm going to post up this afternoon. And then on Wednesday, I'll make a video that kind of does the same process with you, addresses the things that you had to say, and shows you, okay, did you notice this? Did you notice this? All in preparation for you reading an article on your own and answering some exam questions for me this weekend. That particular article will open soon if it hasn't opened already, because you'll have plenty of time to read the article before the exam opens. The exam won't open until a few days before it's due, and you'll have a few days to get it done, but the article will be open so that you can read it. And it's called #SleepyTeens. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope I addressed everything you had concerns about. If not, shoot me an email, and thanks for playing.